Else
Realm
realm
Diners.
Hello, I'm Mark,
And I'm Ruth.
and welcome to the Else Realm Diner. It came from the swirling depths of the multiverse, a sentient cafe, a cosmic mystery, transporting its clientele through all manner of realms. No one knows where the diner came from. All we know is that it seeks interesting conversation, warm memories, and good banter.
On the menu today is Disney princesses.
Yeah,
Maybe with some Ghibli.
yeah, some Ghibli thrown in.
Yeah.
This is going to be an interesting one because Disney princesses, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with, but also as well, I simultaneously can't escape their import and their impact on my life. And yet, at the same time, I feel as though people who just like Disney are fundamentally missing out on an aspect of reality.
Those are some bold and sweeping generalization-y statements.
They are.
I hope you are ready to justify.
I think I am. But I mean, okay, Disney princesses in particular. If we're not going to start by talking about Walt Disney himself, we certainly should talk about the first Disney princess, and that's Snow White.
Yeah.
Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was released in and around Christmas 1937, and it came out of the need or the desire that Walt Disney had to create a feature-length film using his cartoonists, his team of animators, who previously had been doing shorts and gags and this kind of thing.
And actually, all those shorts, sorry, I'm just interjecting.
Yeah.
Are freely available on most of them. Some of them are a bit dodgy, aren't they?
Yeah.
But
on
you
YouTube.
can access quite on YouTube, yeah, and they're actually quite good. I watched quite a few of the Halloween ones.
Yeah. This is
and they were
dancing skeletons, one of my favorites.
Yeah, and I was really wowed by some of them. They were quite creative and interesting. So yeah, sorry, return to your point.
And that's it, is that they were doing interesting work. Obviously Steamboat Willie had been their first sort of animated appearance of Mickey Mouse, and in this instance he wanted to do a feature-length film that was going to stretch his team, but also as well was in and around a story that people could relate to and that people wanted to go and see and to share with their families. And he personally had always loved the story of Snow White, and that's where Disney began this sort of this relationship with female characters who would become Disney princesses or become known as the princesses. But there are some interesting sort of features that all the princesses have. For example, they all have to have an animal sidekick to count. And so when it comes to princesses like potential princess candidates like Maribel in Encanto, the question is, does she count or not? That's a legitimate debate within the Disney princess sort of fandom.
Interesting.
So it became a whole thing, and it became a sort of a standard that Disney increasingly formalized and canonized as time went on. But I suppose a question would be: have they been a net good for people watching them? Have they been a good thing, or are they potentially a very highly stylized thing? I'm not trying not to say bad thing, because I don't think they are bad. But for example, one of the criticisms that Mrs. Soup always has of the idea of princesses in fiction is that that's not something that anyone can really aspire to be. In that sense, you can't
unless
make
you're
yourself
Kate
a princess.
Middleton.
Yeah, unless well, actually, to be really specific, what she says, and one of her criticisms is that princesses only exist by virtue of their relationship to male royal family members. So they can only be the daughter of a king or of a queen, or the husband of a let's say the wife of a prince or a king. So it's not really the same as sort of saying you can do
Well, that's
anything you
been
want to.
changed actually.
Yes.
So that has recently changed in terms of royalty, hasn't it? Because
Hmm.
the first born is now the heir to the throne.
Well, within in Britain,
It,
yeah,
yeah. Well, I'm talking about Britain. We
yeah.
did. Okay. Yes. Okay. Okay. So I hadn't even thought beyond that because my mind is so closed. Um, I mean, I think you need to think about it in terms of the different ways that you can approach these movies and the different ways that they are approached.
Hmm.
Um, so in a sense, on a surface level kind of thing, they are fun, colourful, musical pieces, aren't
Mm.
they?
Hmm.
Um, with an aspiration to for women to marry.
Yeah.
Um, and I think I think part of the issue with this that Disney had is certainly in the ones that are drawn directly from, you know, the grim kind of fairy tale arsenal. So that would be like Snow
Brothers
White
Grimm. Yeah.
And Beauty and the Beast. Uh, I think that they, because of the source material, that is the nature of them. And those kinds of fairy tales are seeped in history. And Sleeping Beauty is the same actually.
Hmm. Hmm.
But they actually are all kind of tales for young girls
Mm.
um, who might have to make unfavorable marriages.
Well,
So
yeah. Well, this is true. Although it's interesting in the mid 90s. This is when Disney formalized the notion of the princesses. Um, Disney Animated Feature Films is the form the actual company that came up with it. Uh, this was an attempt to formalize what these princesses are, who are either royal by birth, royal by marriage, or considered to be a quote unquote princess due to their significant portrayal of heroism in their respective films. And over time, they've actually had formal additions to the princess line in what they term to be coronations. So it's become a really, in that sense, you're talking about the portrayal of princesses from stories, but actually the Disney princess mode is a very formalized structure, and who is not in it is something that Disney takes very seriously. So I was just talking about Encanto, for example. The most recent princess actually added to the line was Moana in 2016. Interestingly, as well, there have been two princesses removed because the criteria became formalized. Tinkerbell from Peter Pan, 1953, was removed, and Esmeralda from The Hunchback of Notre Dame was removed because she's not royal by birth and didn't marry anyone royal. So it's an interesting quandary, isn't it? Where, as you say, it's something that girls can relate to, but it's also an elite club that Disney
no,
maintains.
I wasn't. That's actually not the point. I wasn't saying it was something that girls could relate to. I was saying it was like so. So my understanding is, for example, the history of Beauty and the Beast was it was to do with young women potentially having to make a being presented with a marriage to potentially an older, hairier man,
Hmm. Hmm.
and them being told a story that they will find love in that arrangement
Yeah, yeah. But so, I see.
historically.
So you're sort of saying that in that sense, some of these stories are parables as to
Yeah, well,
how a girl should approach womanhood in that sense.
yeah, and then there's other sort of darker elements. So like Snow White is potentially allegorical of it's not a it's probably not about marriage. It's probably about death. So Prince Charming is probably death, who takes her away at the end, not to a happy marriage, but to peacefully the afterlife.
But is that really what Disney is saying?
No, but I think what I'm trying to suggest here is you have these are coming from a place. So historically, these are coming from a place that were kind of word of mouth stories, weren't they?
Mm.
Fairy tales that were
Mm.
then kind of written down,
Mm.
and that they are then entrenched in that history. But they're also one of the stories, like in different parts of the world, these stories exist, but they maybe have different twists and turns on them. And
Mm.
what Disney has kind of done is retold these stories again,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, and they've put their spin on it, and they have kind of repurposed them in a way that I definitely think merits conversation, because they certainly get rid of kind of so some of them tap into some really nasty things. So like Cinderella
Mm-hmm.
is experiencing, abuse,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and what's she called? Rapunzel.
Mm.
Like, that is a shitty situation. She's like locked in a tower
Yeah.
and not allowed to see anybody and was stolen,
And
and
and yet though this is kind of the heart of my problem with Disney, is that you're describing the true heartfelt human origin of these stories and the reason why people told them to their children, down the centuries. Here, for example, we have a quote from Andy Mooney, former Nike executive, appointed president of the Walt Disney Company's Disney Consumer Products division in 1999. I was standing by the line in the arena of a Disney ice show. I was surrounded by little girls dressed head to toe as princesses. They weren't even Disney products. They were generic princess products they'd appended to a Halloween costume, and the light bulb went off in my head. Clearly, there was a latent demand here. So the next morning I said to my team, "Okay, let's establish standards and a colour palette and talk licenses and get as much product out there as we possibly can that allows these girls to do what they're doing anyway, projecting themselves into the characters from these classic movies." So it's that moment, isn't it, where they have created it's the formal creation of
yeah.
a social standard and narrative. The fact that they even call their own movies classic movies is is fascinating to me, because I'm not criticizing this, as I sort of hinted at the beginning, from a standpoint of being separate from it. I and you, and I suspect many of the people listening to this, grew up surrounded by Disney. In that sense,
Yeah.
Disney has always been, for the most part, the place where we first learn about most of these stories, I would argue. And then
Yeah,
we,
I would say that's true.
yeah. And then so for example, I remember the first time I read, for example, Cinderella, being really disappointed by the differences and going, but that's not Cinderella. If that's what I mean. My
Oh,
initial
so I had the opposite reaction. I was like, "Oh my God, this is so much better."
no,
I
no,
was
no,
so
no, I agree.
it,
I agree. It's better, but I suppose what I'm saying is it was so different that I wondered. Your first introduction to one of these foundational mythological stories, I think, is crucial. And I
yeah.
found myself going, what? But that's not. And somehow it always felt as though the actual story was kind of was a low a bargain brand version of the crisp Disney presentation that has become known as things like classic movies, or that the Disney princesses
Well,
inhabit.
I don't know. I mean, I think of them as like, I mean, you used the term earlier today. I just find them to be highly sanitized
Yeah.
versions of their source material. And as a child, obviously that didn't really impact me at all.
Mm-hmm.
But it did later. But I mean, I think we have to think about the collective message that the Disney princesses give, because I mean, it it and there's been an evolving message, hasn't there? Because certainly prior to the coming together as the package, which is the Disney princesses, there was a, you know, marriage is going to be your happily ever after. Your aspiration should be to do that. There wasn't always a lot of connection between the
Or personal growth.
yeah, there was
You
no
know?
character arcs.
um, or
I
for
mean,
example,
Snow White just kind of wanders through the forest going, ah, ah,
exactly.
ah.
Yeah.
And he hears her beautiful sound and is like, I'm going to marry this girl.
Yeah. She's
And
going to
you're
be
like,
mine.
yes,
Well,
that's the foundation of a good marriage.
but also in the middle there, you've got the awkward. I mean, what Mrs. Soup and I were watching at the weekend. We watched The Emperor's New Groove. And I was sort of saying to her how this feels really weird in so much as it's got the veneer of Mesoamerica, but it's using all modern, all Western reference points. So, for example, Kronk has, at one point, he's having a moral dilemma. On one shoulder is an angel, on the other shoulder is a demon. That's got nothing to do with Mesoamerica. You know, and she was saying, well, this is the awkward sort of cultural appropriation Disney. Like, you know,
Yeah.
in that sort of 90s to 2000s kind of period. And then, but then I do think that they did turn a corner. I think particularly with Tangled, by having a deliberately sort of jokey, slightly more witty take on what it meant to be Rapunzel, what it meant to be the hero. Flynn Rider is a bit of a scoundrel, but also a lovable rogue, and they play
And
with
a
it.
bit of a follower, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You have, you know, it's so I think they've become more self-conscious and more aware of
But
actually
I
they
mean,
need
the
to
other
move the
thing in
times.
that one is that the two characters actually had some, you know,
Mutual respect.
mutual respect, but also like they they got to know each other before they fell in love.
Yeah, yeah. Whereas
And
actually, so actually, for example, we recently watched, did we not, together, Beauty and the Beast. I
yeah,
think in that film, I mean, yes, the time scale is squashed. You can tell that, but in that film, it feels as though they go from like you know barely being able to eat in the same room to something has changed. Maybe I love him.
dude, it's Stockholm syndrome. It's literally Stockholm syndrome. She's like kidnapped by this man. She's got to friend him, you know, to do
So as not to be
anything, and then
murdered.
yeah, and then like that's turns into like a humongous trauma bond,
Hmm.
and they're like, now we'll be together forever,
Exactly.
healthy. There's just no way. Like that's the other thing about that is like, in real life, that is so uncool.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
that is so uncool. That is not something that you would be like, this is marriage material,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because he likes books
Yeah.
too.
Absolutely.
And because he wouldn't kill Gaston. I mean, I'm sorry, he should have. Gaston was horrible. Oh.
He was actually, yeah, that's a good point.
And also, he was so depressive. Like the mental health problems in that man. Like
He needed help. Yep.
he needed help, and he got uglier when he turned into a human.
Well, he became very sort of. I think you and Mrs. Soup described it as he became very vanilla.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, just personally, I think the castle's crap as well. Once it transforms back into this kind of, you know, pale, pallid, covered in cherub thing. Much prefer a bit more of the, you know, the gargoyles and
I know, I liked the
and goth.
gargoyles.
Yeah. But then
And
again,
it also says a bad thing about like you can't be, you know, you must be in an enchanted gothic castle.
yeah, exactly.
Because that's the only ones that do enchanted.
Exactly. But you know, and so these are stories that we all know and many of us loved and that we grew up with, and they are stories that that for better or worse are cultural touchstones, uh, and therefore, are inescapable. So I'm not remotely thinking that we can change them by, or change how people relate to them by talking about it like this. But I do think that there's something about what Disney does to these stories, to these shared stories, to these stories that, especially the ones that they drew on from mythology, that makes them so relatable to everyone in a way that's completely sanitized and uncontroversial and non-confrontational, that actually reduces their meaning down to, at best, simple binaries between good and evil, and at
Yeah.
worst, actually just the equivalent of eating a great big block of icing. And the reason why I say that is things like, for example, Tinkerbell is a fascinating case point here. The invention and the spreading of the idea of what a fairy is has been, I would say, incredibly detrimental to actually how fairies operated in traditional stories. So, for example, growing up in Wales, I was conscious of a very storied landscape, and lots of the adults around me would tell me stories about certain woods and forests and dales and valleys, and fairies were not good things. They were the fae are actually terrifying. They're
That's
grim
true.
little creatures that might tempt you into danger or even death. They may take your child and swap it out with one of their own. They aren't creatures to be welcomed, and yet because of Disney, I would argue, the when for example I last went to a small stone circle in Northern Ireland, all the way along the path to it, there were little fairy doors that had been nailed to trees saying "Welcome." There were little, sparkly pink ribbon things all over the place. And I should be clear, I don't believe the Fae exist, so I'm not saying it's a genuine danger that Disney are putting people in, but it is a twisting and a dilution of what was originally, for example, stories that were designed to say, don't go into the forest on your own because you might not come out again. And in a very practical sense, if you fall down a hole, we may never see you again, that kind of thing. And they've become, though,
Mm.
very friendly, very sort of, come on out. And last time I was walking through the forest with my goddaughters, they spent the entire time looking for fairies. And one of them actually even did, in fact, almost crawl into a hole. And I just thought, there's something fundamental here about the purpose of these narratives, the purpose of these fables that Disney has commodified, and ironically
Or
enough,
maybe even misappropriated.
yeah, well, misappropriated, packaged, resold, and in that particular instance, very specifically, they are ironically enough turning the purpose of the story on its head. I.e.,
Yeah.
you shouldn't go into holes in the forest because you may never be seen again. But actually, they go, let's go looking for Tinkerbell.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
And also, Tinkerbell is highly sexualized.
Yeah,
Like her portrayal on film
she's like Betty
is,
Boop
yes.
in some ways.
Uh,
Yeah.
It, I mean, to be fair, I mean, that whole movie, Peter Pan, has some very problematic elements and depictions of Native Americans.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's some, and this is something as well, because there is an underside to Disney, that doesn't necessarily reflect within the package of the Disney princesses in that
Mm.
sense, but there is a kind of racist issue in historical Disney stuff.
Well,
But yeah, I mean,
Peter Pan was made in 1953. So
yeah.
Jim Crow was still around. People were still
Well,
fighting
Dumbo is problematic as well, and
with
obviously
the
Song of the
Ravens. Yeah.
South.
Hmm.
And so I mean, and we're not really talking about that, but I just wanted to say that some of the issues we're talking about today are not necessarily the the biggest issues that Disney has to consider. But yeah, I do think the over sexualization of Tinkerbell is an issue. She wears a very short skirt, doesn't she?
Mm-hmm.
Um, she sort of wiggles her bum and glitter falls out,
Mm.
and she's also not marriageable material.
No.
So in the sense, she's sort of this coquette mistress style.
Tiny little fantasy figure. I mean,
Yeah.
I definitely remember. Just before people think we're jumping to conclusions, there. I mean, I remember some of my friends as they got older watching Peter Pan again and thinking, course she's hot. Thinking like
Yeah, yeah.
it was there, if not for kids to grow into, it was certainly probably there for dads to get through the movie. In some respect, she's a confusing figure in that sense.
Yeah. And I think
she's also, frankly, just too small to have. A human can't have a relationship with her.
Well, no, but this is part of my point. She's sort of this so she's overly
Ornament.
sexualized. Yeah, but she's also like unachievable as a sexual partner.
Hmm.
And it's sort of like that, those are the two things that the girls at that time were presented with. You were given the virginal, married, kind of Wendy figure from that movie, but the Snow Whites and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
who were like these virginal, unsexualized creatures almost.
Mm-hmm.
And then you were given Tinkerbell, who was like not an achievable love interest. And you weren't given anything in between. So it's in the sense of like trying to find a character that you as a girl represents you, that you can empathize with. Like, you were given the virgin or the whore, which is historically a problem in representation of women, because you can't be anything in between. You can be marriage material, or you can be a little coquettish fairy with glitter.
Well, actually,
To be fair,
there's a
I
really.
adored Tinkerbell
Mm-hmm.
when I was a girl for exactly those reasons, that she
Mm-hmm.
was, a little bit naughty, sexually desirable. I was very drawn to that. But then again, you also have then as a kid, so say for example, I wanted to dress up as a fairy for a fancy dress party, for example,
Uh-huh.
I would not be allowed to dress up like Tinkerbell.
No, because
And that again you then have this cultural repression against young girls expressing sexuality as like not appropriate. And so that bleeds into society in a way that perhaps isn't seen.
well, it's not so much that it isn't seen; it's people are unconscious of it. I mean, we've talked in previous episodes about the concept of the habitus, unspoken rules that we all live by, and that we learn
Mm.
primarily through observing the actions of other people, whether or not we know it. They are crucial to how we know, for example, how to go into someone else's house. It's stuff like that, that's so
Mm.
foundational to how we live. We know, for example, that you don't go into someone else's house naked. You know that you don't go into someone else's house and just poop on the sofa. That kind of thing. But actually,
But you don't even go into your own house and poop on the sofa.
well, no, exactly. Yeah, because these are the standards that we all agree to live by. But
Yeah.
I mean, what you were just saying about the options presented to people. There's a book from 1975, which is one of Mrs. Soup's favourites from when she was a classicist. It's called Goddesses, Whores, Wives, and Slaves. And
Yeah.
these were the roles of women in the classical world in order of their importance. So you're an unattainable goddess who may well smite the shit out of someone, or you're a whore who's very accessible, and then in terms of importance, you're a wife who's property, and then you're a slave who's even more property. So it's interesting. I mean, it may well feel a little bit as though we've gone slightly off the path here, but I think it's crucial.
I think this is the discussion actually.
Yeah.
I mean, because I think because Disney is so universally loved and so wide and so far reaching in its audience,
And also,
it has
and also seen as fundamentally harmless.
yeah,
Yeah.
it actually has a responsibility to the people, not just girls, but because we're talking about Disney princesses, I suppose we're focusing on the people that would be interested in that more, which not exclusively, but I would say the majority of girls. But it's sending a message to those people about character, position in society. And I do think that there has been definitely a concerted effort on Disney's part to present characters in a different way, which is what you were just beginning to talk about, so that you have girls who have more ambition than to get married.
Well, I
And
would say that starting, arguably, Pocahontas was a low point in terms of how they used, because this was a sort of traditional tale, the tale of the mapping of America,
but it's
and
also historical, isn't it?
that's what I mean. Yeah, so it's an American foundational tale, their early history, mapping out the West, and their interactions of explorers with Native Americans. In this case, Pocahontas herself, and the presentation of her, again, a little bit like with the Emperor's New Groove, is one which it's a veneer on top of very modern Western values.
The other thing that I find a little bit alarming about that is, as I understand it, the real story, Pocahontas was
Hmm.
very young in comparison to John Smith.
Yeah.
And again, I feel that that's romanticized an inappropriate age gap when
Well,
you actually go look into the historical
yeah.
information about
But
it.
then again, an awful lot of these tales have those. I mean, like Snow White is about a 14-year-old, for example. Um, but then again, Snow White is a tale. Pocahontas is based on
Yes.
real history.
No, but
Yeah,
that's where I feel like my distinction is,
yeah.
because I also feel like Snow White is not, yeah, it's not literal, it's not historical, it's entrenched in kind of, Snow White's age has probably changed throughout the course of the decades or centuries.
I mean, canonically, she's 14 in the Disney movie.
Yeah, but that's Disney.
No,
Yeah, that is
yeah.
that's well, you don't know how long she stays with the dwarfs, do you? She could have been like the ripe old age of 18.
But actually, interestingly, in terms of Pocahontas, John Smith is actually classed as a Disney prince by virtue of his relationship with Pocahontas, which is interesting.
Well, actually, I don't think that's a thing. I
Like
mean, in
that,
this sense, the husbands are reduced to mere like, I mean, in terms of, I mean, we're talking about the representation of women in movies, but like the husbands in this case are just like an aperitif, aren't they? Maybe that's the wrong thing. An
well,
attaché case.
they're often ancillary to the main character. Certainly, they're just there to support them or to provide a context for them in many cases. But then again, if you think about Prince Charming, you can't really say much about him in that sense, but he is nonetheless the crucial actor in his film when it comes to rescuing his princess. It's
I don't know. I think you just have to reframe that. I think she was rescued by the dwarves. She was living her best life,
hmm
with seven small men.
hmm
And I think the problem with Snow White is it's just a bad story.
but
It's a
but
bad telling of the tale, I
yeah,
think.
yeah. But isn't this essentially our whole point about, to a certain extent, the problems with many Disney films is that often they don't actually have a lot to say. They're just often quite pleasant fluff, but at times with slightly bizarre decisions made in terms of the use of things like, for example, cultural appropriation, or in the case of women's roles and women's goals, they're just unattainable. For example, if we were ever blessed with a daughter, for example, I would not tell her that she's a princess. I just wouldn't, because she's
Well, actually,
not.
I think what Disney are doing with the word princess is they're taking it away from the traditional royal sense, are they? By classifying what that is, and even putting in, what did you say earlier? Things about they've got to be,
Heroic within their own culture.
yeah,
Yeah. The
there
thing
you
is,
go.
the thing,
But that is not actually.
but the thing is, all of the Disney princesses, all 13 of them at the moment, no, sorry, 12 of them, they're about to have a 13th in the form of Rhea. They all have connections to royalty or aristocracy.
No, I'm not saying that's not that's not the truth.
No.
I completely understand what you're saying, but by adding other parts to that definition, they're changing what the word princess means literally in this sense, because it also means the heroic aspect. And I
Yeah.
think what they're doing with that is they are trying to make this aspirational word mean and be achievable, even if it's not through the sense that it's the bloodline or the marriage situation, but you're talking about the heroic thing that you do within a family context.
Yes. Yeah. But
Now, whether that's getting rid of the problematic element of that
well, I don't,
is,
and I don't think it is. I think it's just
no, I don't think it is
it's attempt to
either.
reform it, which arguably
Yes,
really began with Mulan.
yes.
An actual tale which was rooted in a different culture. Eddie Murphy's Dragon talks about, he's there, in fact, to help to preserve the honor of the ancestors and to look after Mulan as she goes off on an adventure to take a heroic stance in place of her father, who's ailing and can't fight in the army.
Mm-hmm.
That was clearly Disney attempting to course correct. There's Tiana in The Princess and the Frog. She runs a 1920s New Orleans cafe restaurant. She knows people who are local aristocracy, who are a bit sort of entitled, but she becomes a princess because a prince falls in love with her, and at the end they're running a cafe together. But unless she has connections to royalty,
Mm-hmm.
Rapunzel, daughter of a king and queen, kidnapped, so she doesn't necessarily know that she's a princess. One of the interesting things there is that they flip some of it on its head in terms of who's the hero, who needs rescuing. At times, Flynn Rider definitely needs rescuing in that movie. I like the fact
Well,
that
I think the prince in the Prince and the Frog needs rescuing as
oh
well,
yeah,
because
yeah, because he's a frog.
they but not even from the point of view of the frog bit, but his ideal. Like, so I watched that for the first time recently and bloody loved the music. So I
Hmm.
was just in thought that was really great. But like the whole thing with him is he's arrogant. He doesn't have any direction.
Hmm.
He's almost,
Self-indulged. Yep.
yeah. And I'm like, oh, the problems of the rich,
Mm.
but she does actually have a positive impact on him. She has dreams and aspirations.
Yeah. So Rapunzel entangled. I like the fact that she goes from having the long blonde golden hair to actually, when she finds herself and her heroism, her hair is shorter. It's ready for action, and it also happens to go dark. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that means. I think it's sort of it's a transition from magical hair to just her actual hair color, because in the film her hair
Oh,
is
I think
infused
that's
with the
girl
power
to
of a
woman.
flower, isn't it?
That's a she got it. Period.
No, well, potentially, yeah, potentially. But anyway, the point is, again, a bit more agency, a bit more self-empowerment there.
Mm.
Merida in Brave,
Who I
absolutely,
love,
yeah.
love.
I find it a little bit annoying that it's such a pastiche and contraction of. I mean, it's hard to say when that film is actually set. Is it actually set in? Because they're drawing on real world Scottishness, but
Yeah, they are.
there's stuff about Vikings, there's stuff about later medieval period in terms of castles. There's ancient stuff in terms of stone circles. So it's hard. It's basically it's a it's a
It's old-ish.
it's it well for me. again, coming from Wales, it's the Celt next door. It's Americans and an English perspective on the mysterious Celts. That's basically what that film is about. But nonetheless, Merida is very cool. She's very funny. She's very determined in her own way, and obviously Billy Connolly as her father is incredible.
Well, I think the thing with Merida as well is that she is actively not trying to be beautiful. So she is beautiful, but there's definitely a step away from conventional beauty,
Yeah, yeah.
which I think was the first time they'd legitimately done that.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, she's got that beautiful wild ginger hair.
Mm-hmm.
And she's not preening, and she's not. And also, I think that was the first time they made the female character a different, like, because the characters are like different shapes, aren't they,
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
that one? And again, so you're moving away from this classical beauty standards
Yeah,
into
she's got.
something where you're celebrated for something slightly more than just being a, you know, an hourglass silhouette
Yeah.
and a pretty voice.
That said, though, that itself is a massive stereotype. The wild redhead.
No, you're right. And
It's a
but
massive stereotype. Like,
no, it is a massive stereotype, but it was it yes, I don't think she represents Scotland well. Like, I'm not saying that she represents Scotland well, but I'm very I was also very
no, I agree.
happy
I agree.
that
Yeah.
she created some actual like
Yeah, it's
interesting
not. It's
shaped she's not like a
she.
cookie cutter
Yeah,
princess.
she hasn't got. For example, she hasn't got huge boobs. For example, she hasn't got great big hips. She is, in many respects, I think Merida what people might have called a tomboy. And in that
Yeah.
sense, she's absolutely my cup of tea. When I was in high school, that would have been the girl I'd have been going after. But but that none of that is bad. I think as you say, she is her own thing. She also it's great the way that she enters the competition for herself. She's like
Yeah.
yeah, sod it. These people can't win me. I'm gonna beat them all for me and win my own rights. That's fantastic. I'm just saying that ironically enough, though, they can't help but draw on that stereotype. And then Moana, obviously,
So Moana again, we have like a move away from like she has more natural proportions in
yeah.
the sense that her waist, specifically her waist,
Mm-hmm.
is like humanly possible from a like biological point of
Humanly
view.
possible, but also actually representative of Polynesian people. She actually
Yeah.
looks like she's from that part of the world. Yeah, in terms of
And
her
again, I
proportions.
mean, again, I'm not saying Disney are getting this stuff right,
Hmm.
but I'm saying that they're moving and they're consciously moving in a direction that is positive.
Yeah, I think so. And then, I mean, and
Uh,
specifically in the case of because actually, if Brave and Merida is a collection of lazy stereotypes about Scotland and the Celtic fringe, particularly from an American perspective. Moana, at the very least, actually had a writing board and a group of people who have been chosen above that to act as a sort of a check on cultural appropriateness, which was made up of people who had their roots in Southeast Asia and in the Polynesian islands and into Australia and New Zealand. So I think Taika Waititi was involved in writing the story as well. So it's actually they're handing over deliberately, and you could say this is partly also a marketing gimmick because it's become fashionable to do this now, to be more conscious in your behaviour.
well, actually, no. I mean, I don't think it's a market. I think they've been they've been highly criticized.
Yeah, and held
I mean,
accountable.
when Pocahontas came out, there was a backlash.
Mm. Yeah, because
You know,
people couldn't take it anymore. They're like, just stop doing what you want to
yeah,
do with our shit. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, and I think so. And I don't think that's been the only backlash. There's been a lot of like feminist backlashes about the princesses before I think they were the princesses, if you see what I mean. So I
Hmm.
think and I think Disney are listening to their audience in the sense that young girls don't need like vacuous role models or
Yeah.
characters in their stories. You know, they can have strong, brave,
They can be judged by the content of their
funny.
character as opposed to the size of
Yes,
their wardrobe. Yeah.
yeah. And but again, I just think like, you know, it's I do think there's steps in the right direction. And I think the fact that you mentioned Frozen, I think Frozen's actually a very interesting example
Well,
because
interestingly, just briefly there, just to highlight, because again, some people may already know this, and I want to acknowledge that we know it. Frozen actually doesn't contain a Disney princess.
okay,
Interestingly, they're not part of the official princesses lineup.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
So but Frozen, I think, was a step away from the simplistic good versus evil.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I also was pleased about that because I think and that's been something that happened in Encanto as well, wasn't it? Where it's
Mm-hmm.
like the evil is not, or the evil, but you know, the 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 antagonism within the story that creates the drama
Mm-hmm.
is coming from a different place, a
Mm.
more complex place. And we're getting, you know, character arcs. So like, you know, Elsa has to learn to accept herself
Mm-hmm.
in order to control this power, which and so she is the antagonist within the story. She but her the evil, the drama, the plight comes from a place where she's repressed thing, you know, to the point where she's exploded.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, you have something similar happening in Canto where the grandmother is holding so tightly to the ideal of the family to try and keep this thing safe that she's repressing and stifling the people that she loves. And
Mm.
I think these kinds of things are a good move away from this simplistic good versus evil, because you're actually getting um, you're getting a better story, basically, aren't you? And you're also getting some more interesting characters because in both of those cases, the antagonist is a female. The
Mm-hmm.
females are not just this one size, like they're not so like, you know, the Snow White thing is you're either like a freaking cougar who wants to kill people,
Mm-hmm.
or you're like a virginal child who is going to get swept away by Prince Charming, who doesn't even have a name,
Mm. Mm.
doesn't even have a name.
Yeah.
And like, so I think from that point, we're actually getting better representation. You know, the evil stepmother or the, you know, wronged stepchild. We're now getting like an elderly woman represented in a better way as well. It's not just these Disney princesses in that sense. And I think, again, this is a step in the right direction. We're seeing better stories, better representations of what humanity is, you know, more
Well,
characters
but
that are lovable.
yeah, exactly. More better representations of family struggles as opposed to family roles.
Yeah.
So it's not just a case of you will be a princess. It's more a case of please know that you're loved. That
Yeah.
kind of thing.
But also like the sister, the I don't know if she's a sister, the one that's like, I'm the strong one,
Yep. In Encanto.
whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, like she is so out of type for what Disney normally creates.
Uh huh. Yep.
And she's fabulous.
No, yes, absolutely. So yes, without a doubt, Disney have been making moves to demonstrate that they're listening, that they've learned some crucial lessons. But at the same time, though, they can't let go of the princesses. So
No, that's true.
for example, I mean, actually, a new princess is going to be added to the line soon. She's going to be called Asha, in a movie called Wish that's coming out in the next couple of years. 17-year-old heroine, determined, incredibly smart, optimistic, and insightful leader in the making, who sees darkness that others don't. In a moment of desperation, she makes a wish on the stars, which is answered by a cosmic force. So, it's
When you wish
yeah,
upon
well,
a
exactly,
star.
exactly. But the point being that is that they can't let go of the princesses. Even, for example, in this list of princesses I've just been looking at, Mirabelle and actually Anna and Elsa are mentioned as, quote, honorary unofficial princesses, in so much as they often appear at the Disney parks with the princesses. Despite here, it says here, despite not being official Disney princess, Mirabelle, for example, was present with the other official princesses in some World Princess Week attractions in 2022. So,
But again, by naming them, they've created this problem for themselves. By creating the Disney Princesses brand,
well,
they have then boxed themselves in, haven't they?
and this is precisely my point. Is that I feel
Almost like we're on a wavelength.
I feel as though Disney's, at the moment we're approaching a point, I think, next year when the first iteration of Mickey Mouse will enter public domain. So Steamboat Willie Mickey, that black and white one who's very bouncy and whistling, will no longer be just Disney's property. Anyone can use that character in any way that they see fit. And because in order to get around the 95-year copyright control that they have over their intellectual property, what they've done is deliberately iterated Mickey over the decades so that the current Mickey Mouse is not that Mickey Mouse, because they want to have control and they want to maintain their brand and their image. And so in that sense, everything that they do with the princesses and with every movie that they release, and arguably we've seen this happen increasingly with the Star Wars franchise, and other things that they own, everything has to reflect well on the House of Mouse. And therefore I feel as though that is a limiting factor, and especially when it comes to the formalization of what the princesses are, it is in effect a formalization of what they own, of what their rights are, and crucially of what other people cannot do with those characters. So
Yeah.
it's not even about the nature of the princesses. It's primarily about Disney's ability to, well, as I quoted earlier with that former head of Nike marketing, to formally have their finger in that pie, and this is where I think Disney has an insurmountable problem for me, a fundamental one that I just find myself wanting to resist, and that is that I don't think that they own or should own in our hearts the things like virtues, attributes of bravery and goodness, and or our big foundational epic stories that help children to learn who they might be in the world. Unfortunately, though, in a very real way, they do own them, and
Yeah, it's
most
hard, isn't
children,
it?
well, most children will only know these stories because of Disney,
Yeah.
and therefore they only know the Disney-owned and sanctioned and branded and also formulated stories, because and this is where I want, if it's okay, I want to bring in Studio Ghibli, for example, Japanese animation house, most notably headed up by Hayao Miyazaki. And some of the things that Mr. Soup and I have noticed over the years watching his films, or their films, is that, first of all, it's a fundamentally different way of telling stories. More often than not, there isn't actually a bad guy that the good guys are fighting. More often than not, there's a situation that people find themselves in that they have to either accept or grow into or grow out of. It's about
Yeah.
personal change, personal responsibility, and personal acceptance. So, for example, probably the most well-known Studio Ghibli movie is Spirited Away. Have you seen Spirited Away?
Of course.
Yeah, no, I'm just checking because you haven't seen them all, have you? So,
No,
no,
but
so Spirited Away, most people have seen. Well, most people who are interested have seen it, and it's such an important story because Miyazaki specifically said, so where we've had the Nike executive saying, "There's all these girls who want to be princesses. We need to own that part of the market." He said in an interview, Well, I was looking around and I noticed that there wasn't really anything for girls between 8 and 15 out there. You know, there's like the princesses, or there's the, pop culture, especially in Japan, idols, this kind of thing. And he wanted to
Mm.
provide something that would just be for them, and that would be fun, and that would help them think about their time in life. And so Chihiro in that film starts off as a scared, clinging to her parents' little girl. And by being exposed to the most bizarre alternate dimension spiritual world in Japan, she literally takes ownership of her name. She takes ownership of her actions. She changes the world around her through her own bravery, and discovers something about herself, so that when she goes back into the real world, the world is a place that she can be more confident in. And
Hmm.
that's what he wanted to provide. It wasn't a case of, we need to market this, we need to have
But
all
do
of
you
the.
think that's a Disney problem, or do you think that's an American problem?
It's potentially an American problem. And the thing is, Japan isn't immune from it. I mean, even within that film, they highlight that Japan, for example, was filled with, in the 80s and 90s, theme parks that went bust. And now Japan's seeing another massive theme park boost, ironically enough, or coincidentally enough, rather, in the form of the Ghibli theme park that's just opened. So they do definitely own their brand, and they do definitely,
Yeah.
market it. But what I would say is, at the heart of the story isn't um, isn't this it's this very Western, this very familiar way of telling stories. Another one that comes to mind. Have you seen Kiki's Delivery Service? Did we watch
No, I
that with you?
haven't.
No. Okay. So in that
Oh, is
film,
that the one with the cat?
well, there is a cat, yeah, but there's also a girl. I think the girl's the main character. Oh no, sorry, no, that's not the no. So there's the cat one is Whisper of the Heart, and then there's also the Cat Returns.
Yeah,
But
I've seen those ones.
Kiki's
I
Delivery
can't remember
Service,
their name.
she has a small cat with her, um, called Chi Chi. But Kiki is a young witch. She's just about to be 13 years old in this world where, when you reach that age, you go out into the world, you settle down for a year in a new town, and try and find your way as a working witch. And what's really cool is that nothing about it is witchy. Nothing about it is, in that sense, the little old lady with the apple going, "Oh, yeah, try this, my young one." It's actually about
But are you not, so I hate to say this and interrupt you mid thing, but are you not just complaining about the Western story style?
no,
Uh,
no, no. I'm not.
are
No,
you
no, no.
sure?
Listen,
Because,
listen.
okay,
So in that film, she goes out, and it's more or less like being. I've seen people, who've written really interesting essays about how actually it's comparable to being, a young artist. For example, you go out, you're trying to do your best work, whether or not people will like it. It plays on your mind a lot. Sometimes you might work yourself to the bone for very little, in the way of demonstrable benefit, etc., etc. But there's a point in that film, very specifically, that I remember both me and Mrs. Soup noticing, and that is, there's a point when she set up with this delivery service. Her skill is that she can fly around on a broom, and she goes to this old lady's house, and the old lady wants to bake a fish pie for her granddaughter's birthday. And we both had this very visceral sense that, oh my God, is this going to be an old witch who's actually the bad guy of the film? Is she going to, to confront, or to somehow, start being a bad influence on this world, and this is going to be the baddie that Kiki has to fight? No, no, not at all. It's an old lady, and she literally is making a fish pie for her granddaughter. Uh, we just became very conscious of the fact that actually it's not just Disney and Western storytelling. It's the fact that the story wasn't about bumping into an old witch in the woods. It was a story about Kiki learning who she wanted to be, and finding, again, heroism within herself. Um, and that moment struck us so hard, because we both fully expected, we were both looking out for, because this is a film where witches exist, for the crone. We were looking for that external entity to fight against. And I think it's fascinating that often in these films, particularly from Ghibli, but also there are other Japanese animators, there are also other Western animators who just don't present this hyper stereotypical way of talking about good and bad, and the struggle between virtue and the antithesis of caring about people.
Well, actually, I mean, I think the thing is what you're talking about there in a wider sense is um the the method of telling a story. So like fairy tales particularly don't really demonstrate character growth.
No.
Like historically they don't. Um Whereas modern storytelling is
Hmm.
all about that. In fact, stories that aren't character led with personal growth within them are alien to a modern audience in a sense now, because that's where the fashion in storytelling is. That doesn't. So
Well,
I mean,
except that, for example, Kiki's Delivery Service is from 1989.
no, well, no, I mean modern as in last 100 years of
No, I know,
writing.
but in 1989, Disney released, let's see, Little Mermaid, in 1989 movie,
That's
where
my favorite princess,
it is, yeah,
Ariel.
yeah. But surely you must have heard the criticisms about how she loses her voice in
Oh yeah,
in
yeah.
becoming,
That was just
uh,
that was none of that is relevant to my favorite. The relevancy is the fact that that was the film I liked most when I was a kid.
yeah. But I suppose what I'm saying is, at the time when Disney was doing things like Little Mermaid and Flight of the Navigator, that's a pretty good movie actually, Flight of the Navigator. Um, uh, the Beauty and the Beast, 1991. In other parts of the world, we had these stories about an independent girl, an independent
No,
young
no, I'm
woman.
not. I'm not arguing with you, but what I'm saying is, I think they were drawing on source material where that personal growth wasn't part of the story, because typically they were drawing on historical word of mouth fairy tale kind of things,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and those stories don't have that. They're not. They're a collection of events
Well,
rather than a personal growth
there's stories that
story.
are built around archetypes, aren't they? And so those
Yeah.
archetypes don't really change. The hero and his nature doesn't really change. The princess and her nature doesn't really change. The bad
Mhm.
guy and their nature doesn't really change because the
The
story.
circumstances change, but
Yeah,
the personhood doesn't change.
yeah.
And this is what I'm saying. So this is a modern, in the sense of like in the history of storytelling,
Hmm.
preferred way of telling stories now, where characters have personal growth,
Hmm.
um and that personal growth allows them to overcome some obstacle.
Hmm.
But and we don't, like, so in a book, if you read a book now, you would not expect any other type of narrative unless it was like non-fiction, would you?
Mm-hmm. No.
And in fact, if you read a narrative where there wasn't personal growth, it would feel old.
Well, I'm not. I'm. Yes.
Well,
Yes.
it would,
Yeah.
and that I think is the thing. Like Studio Ghibli were drawing upon or creating a modern narrative, whereas Disney were looking backwards.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a fair point. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that then is the difference that you see within those two movies,
Hmm.
or those two kind of ways of approaching it.
Hmm.
Is the fact that Disney is harking back to this, sanitized historical place, where characters are not really formed in the way that a modern character is.
Hmm. Hmm.
And Ghibli was doing, or Ghibli. Why am I saying it wrong every time? Ghibli is doing
Yeah, I
the
think you can
opposite.
say it both. I think it just is Ghibli in.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
but I think the whole thing with Ghibli is they were then moving away from that. They were wanting to produce something else because they had like a different goal in mind, arguably a more noble goal,
Well,
a more
well,
relatable goal.
I mean, if you really want to go down to motivations, I think the foundational element for
Money.
no, No, the foundation element for Japan at the time was having come out of the Second World War and having seen cities reduced to firestorms
And actually, there's
and
a
nothing.
there is a that's the other thing I think about Ghibli that happens that I there's a very anti-war sentiment throughout everything, isn't there?
Yeah, there's anti-war. If you think about other animations from the time, you've got Akira. That's
Oh, I love
about a
Akira.
society that's come out of the aftermath of World War III and a bombing of
Yeah.
Tokyo. So you have New Tokyo in that film. In the case of Ghibli, one of his earliest animations, one of Hayao Miyazaki's, animations, I think this was prior to Studio Ghibli actually, but it's now part of their library, was Nausicaa Valley of the Wind, which is basically it's a post-apocalyptic world where they have to try and find a way of living with the aftermath of huge scale destruction. So I think, yeah, it's a fundamentally, I would say, fundamentally less comfortable place to be and more reflective place to be that
And I also
that they
don't
found
think that,
themselves in, compared to, for example, Walt Disney.
yeah.
Who was creating Disney in the context of a massive economic boom in America after the Second World War. People had tons of money to spend, and he was providing an experience in the Disneylands, but also a new animation and entertainment experience that this burgeoning middle class could go out and chuck money at.
Yeah, but I would also say that Ghibli doesn't shy away from some of the kind of pretty horrific things. So like the what's it called? The Grave of the Fireflies.
Yep. Hmm.
Yeah, that is a lovely but very, very sad and starkly emotionally draining. I mean, I've seen it a couple of times, but like I walk away from it just feeling hollow because
Yep.
it's
Hmm.
really it really takes it out of me. And I think, they're exploring issues that and this is where I think there is a comparison. So like a lot of the original fairy tales that Disney drew upon to make their version were exploring very dark themes.
Yeah.
And Disney's kind of just been like, la la la, gloss,
Princesses
shiny,
magic. Yeah.
pretty, and I think Ghibli by comparison hasn't. It's lent into
Hmm.
those more, you know, horrible, darker, emotional experiences that are part of human life, grief and death. And it's like, a lot
Well,
of
well,
like
well.
Bambi's mother dies, like, and it's like, ta-da, move on, orphaned.
Yes, but also as well as say, I don't think it's just the dark stuff. I think also Ghibli, uh, as a studio, the anime, and I think sorry, lots of Japanese animation in general actually takes pleasure in the beauty of the mundane. There
Mm.
is magic to be found in how a meal is cooked, for example. There is something
But
beautiful.
again, I think that's a Japanese cultural thing because there's quite a lot of like the thing, isn't there, of being in the moment, making the food, making
Yeah,
the like the art of making sushi. Lots of that is precise cuts
yeah.
and the presentation, which is I think when you see some sort of slapped macaroni and cheese on the plate, you've not got that attention to detail in a Western culture, have you?
No, but I suppose a version of that you could argue is in Beauty and the Beast when you have the "Be Our Guest" song. But
Oh,
again,
but
that's
that's
much.
French, isn't
It,
it? That's the French
well, it's sort of French cuisine, but
culinary.
it's actually more to the point. It's Broadway musical.
Oh yeah, that is
It's what it
totally
is.
boring.
It's
Well, to be
it's
fair,
not
they
actually
did
even
move
about the
into
food, really. It's
that.
about the cutlery.
Yeah,
Hmm.
but they did move towards the musical element more, and like the Let It Go thing was much more musical esque
Hmm. Hmm.
than the other ones had been. And I again,
Well, I don't know. I'm
it's
not sure that's true. I mean, Aladdin, massively musical. Prince Ali, yes, it is
oh
he,
yeah,
Ali.
you're
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Okay, fine. I've just made a point that is incorrect.
No, I don't think it is
And
incorrect, but
now I am
but it's
shamed.
it's the I think it's the deployment, isn't it? That's what we're comparing. It's the deployment of ways of entertaining people that is different.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, this is why at the beginning I sort of made a joke about the quality of people who just like Disney. Is that for me? I think it's entirely possible to watch Disney, collect Disney, like Disney, and never really think about anything that you're watching. You can just go, "This is lovely," whereas,
But can I just give my other complaint about Disney?
yeah,
Which is that they are like a factory of output for anything they get their hands on.
yeah,
And to the point where I start hating franchises. And even if they're producing good quality stuff, I'm like, you're oversaturating the market.
yeah,
And and what they've done with Star Wars is a case in point. Like, sometimes less is more.
yeah, yeah. Or sometimes, I mean, we can talk about this probably in another episode, I think. But for example, with The Mandalorian, what I'm finding interesting about that series is how they started with a really interesting concept, and now they're just trying to feed demand, or certainly trying to feed a schedule that's been laid out by executives, which is interesting there. But I suppose one other thing that we haven't really touched on when it comes to Disney and princesses, but also by virtue of their stories, the bad guys, is this trend towards telling other stories, not only in terms of quality of character, but also in terms of the bad guys. It's actually the tendency in recent years for Disney to tell those stories as well. So we've had
The Disney
Maleficent.
villains.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Maleficent 2014. More recently, there's been Cruella's story, where she's played by Emma Stone, both of which also incidentally are live action movies as opposed to animation. Do you think
Disney are redoing their entire catalogue, aren't they, as live animation?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so
Because
Cinderella and
that's a thing.
yeah, Aladdin. Oh god,
Mulan.
Oh god, yeah, Mulan.
The Lion King.
Gutted Mulan. Oh yeah, well, but that goes back to your point about being a factory, I suppose. The factory floor must always be busy.
Again, I'm so excited about The Little Mermaid. I'm so gonna go watch that.
Must consume.
No, but I love the Little Mermaid is my childhood movie.
Yep.
From Disney. Now, it's not to say I didn't watch a lot of others, but that was, and I mean, I grew up when Aladdin came out and like The Lion King came out, and there was this succession of amazing Disney movies that came out in succession. But the one that I was watching when I was a little girl was, The Little Mermaid, and apparently my cousin told me, much to my embarrassment, many years ago, but she quoted me from my childhood, which I have no memory of saying, but it's stupid enough to have come from me.
Just tell us what you said.
Apparently I was like, I love Ariel. I just love her. I just want to be her. Look at her hair. I need to have hair like that. And now I look at it and go, she was an impetuous 16-year-old, and I don't really want to be her.
I don't know.
And she didn't have the most intelligent friends.
No.
Like, Guttle was pretty stupid.
Yeah.
Flounder was a bit of a flounder.
But of course, you're really looking forward to seeing this film.
I am. I'm so excited. Not least because it's got a black,
protagonist,
female lead, and I just was like, oh yes, that's wonderful, because it, very whitewashed, isn't it, Disney? Even the historically, like, even the non-white characters were pretty white, weren't they?
They were. Anyway, what do you think of the retelling of these stories from the perspective of the bad guys? Do you think that is another way that they're attempting to find and mine, if you want to be a little bit cynical, depth from their stories? Is it an attempt to create new perspectives and therefore actually tackle some of the criticisms that have been laid against them about, for example, the single note aspect of, for example, Maleficent in the past?
No, I don't know. I mean, I I have always been drawn to the dark characters
Mm-hmm.
in a sense of like that just so, I just find that more interesting than these like saccharine sweet people that just make me want to vomit a little bit. But sorry.
It's fine. It's fine. That's more or less what I was saying at the beginning of this episode. But you've said you've boiled it down to a true, bodily sensation.
Yeah. Well, it's not so much as like a whole vomit. It's like one of them little like where it sort of comes in the back of your throat and you get a little bit of like acid reflux.
Okay, actually, there you go. There you go. That's my point about this trend towards Maleficent and Cruella, etc. I'm not sure where they're coming from for the Disney, the Disney mega fans. In so much as I know people who do, one of their key core identity things is I collect Disney movies. And that's all they have on their shelf, really. Actually, they don't really have much of a movie collection at all. But they collect.
But they're missing out.
I know. Well, I know. But they collect all the Disney movies, and I just find myself thinking: is this your key emotional range? Is this because often they also tend to be incredibly happy people who never really talk about anything real to me. They're just sort of la la la, hi, hello.
Yeah, but that in itself is a problem, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, I kind of.
But I suppose therefore, how does Maleficent's story fit in with that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's a really. I'm not sure I have a fully formed answer, to be honest, but I mean, I don't think it's bad because I mean, the fact that these characters are one-dimensional or even zero-dimensional means that putting in a backstory is possible.
Yeah.
Because if they weren't that dimensionless, you don't have the creative freedom to create an entire framework into which they became that
thing, yeah,
force for negativity. But I mean, the Maleficent movie really annoyed me, actually, in the sense that it changed the kiss.
Mm-hmm.
Like it if you consider that canon within that universe, it completely changes the story.
Yes.
And I'm like, and I bet Disney thought they were like being so clever and getting away from True Love's kiss and everything. And it's still True Love's kiss. It's just not a romantic love's kiss. And I'm just like,
So actually, that's there you go. So it's an attempt to sort of to retroactively redeem what now is considered to be either poor storytelling or even genuinely bad motivations in terms of story.
I mean, it's difficult because like Maleficent was like created for that Disney thing, whereas Cruella de Vil was based upon a book. So I think in the book there is a bit more to her and backstory.
Mm-hmm.
But also I have to say 101 Dalmatians and Cruella de Vil were just like meh to me. So I don't and in fact Maleficent was the same, like Sleeping Beauty and 101 Dalmatians, although I had seen them both, they were not the areas where I had any particular interest in those stories. Like they were not ones that I loved or that spoke to me as a kid, if that makes sense. Whereas like if you did one on Ursula, I would be like, interesting. But yeah, I mean, I don't see why they had to make Maleficent in a story that is good versus evil. I don't think she needs to be. I don't think you need to retroactively correct the fact that you did just a purely evil character. And yeah, it's probably a marketing thing. It feels a little bit like to me, when how Jane Austen wrote Pride and Prejudice, and there isn't a sequel.
No.
And then there's been like Death Comes to Pemberley by P.D. James,
which I love.
No, I'm not criticizing I'm not criticizing it, but
No,
yes,
I
you
know.
do love it. And then there's like erotic novels like Nights and Days at Pemberley, and then there's like Pemberley. There's a story called Pemberley. There's like about 20 different like sequels to it by a different
Hmm.
author, somebody
Hmm.
like fan fiction. It's like glorified fan fiction to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where I think it is. It's like it's maybe a little bit desperate.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm not sure we're adding much to the situation in terms of anything. It might be mildly interesting. I didn't really care for Maleficent.
And this is, again, this is the thing, isn't it? Disney exists to produce stuff,
Yeah.
and it always has to be producing new stuff. Recently, Studio Ghibli, as an animation studio, shut down. They decided they had nothing else they wanted to make. So instead, now they exist as an entity that looks after the and curates the canon, also the back catalogue, and for example runs the theme park. So they've found a different way of existing because they didn't just want to be just producing mid-tier stuff or a sequel to Spirited Away just because it was popular. Now it's interesting. There's an article just here that I've just come across on BBC.com. It's under their work life subsection. The headline here is: "There's a good chance that some of your beliefs have been influenced by decades of animated movies. Repeated exposure, for example, to VHS tapes in the 90s might have changed how you viewed the world." It says here, some researchers divide the corporation, Disney, that is, the corporation's portrayal of women into distinct eras. First came the domestic era, when female characters like Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, and Cinderella were portrayed as homemakers, often cleaning and in need of rescue by men. Then came the rebellious New Age phase. Again, this is a direct quote. I don't think we can link to it in the description for the podcast, but if you Google that headline, you'll definitely come across it. The rebellious New Age phase of Ariel in The Little Mermaid. Went a
Mermaid.
bit scouse then. In The Little Mermaid. Princess Jasmine in Aladdin, Pocahontas, somewhat, and Mulan.
Belle was rebellious.
Yeah, rebellion. Um, During this period, Disney's women, they say, seem to gain a more independent streak, striving to free themselves from the bonds of society. But Ariel also sacrifices her voice in order to be with the man that she loves. The symbolism here is powerful, wrote Melissa Adessa Tobin and her colleagues at the Family Studies Department of Colorado State University in one study. To win the love of the prince, she must forfeit her thoughts, her voice, and her intellect. I.e., her independence and identity. Now, they go on to say that for critics, all of this stuff, there's a few paragraphs that I've skipped there, sends a strong message to young children that reinforces that any long-standing relationship must be founded upon certain gender stereotypes, and there's some evidence that this has led, to lasting impressions. A study by family life researcher Sarah Coyne at Brigham Young University, inspired by concerns about her own daughter's consumption of Disney, found that engagement with Disney princesses in young girls around 2 years old was associated with greater female gender stereotypical behaviour. And also, interestingly though, a year later in their lives, a lower self-body esteem.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing.
So one more thing. It also goes on to talk about how Disney has a tendency to demonize the mentally ill and to present simple solutions to complex problems.
Yeah, I mean, I still love the Little Mermaid. I mean, the biggest issue.
I really don't mean to interrupt you, but isn't that the point, though? Of course you do. Of course you love it because you grew up with it, and as I was saying before, I can't escape from it either. I love some of Disney stuff.
No, but what I was making a more less trite point, which was, I mean, the thing with the Little Mermaid. Sorry, that wasn't meant to be a critical
No. I'm
review.
joking. Go on.
Was the fact that the Hans Christian Andersen story that it's based on is a tragic tale. In the end, she turns into sea foam.
Mm.
because she doesn't win
Yeah.
the heart of her prince.
Yeah.
And I think, you have to, and I think that the issue with that is that fundamentally changes the meaning of the tale.
Mm. Mm.
And I think you do, as a child, and maybe even as an adult, you want a happy ending in your stories, but that doesn't mean that happy endings are the right endings.
No, no. And so briefly going back to Ghibli as a counterpoint, there are stories like Only Yesterday, and some others where they're examining people who are in their sort of 20s and 30s, looking back at their childhoods, and these are stories that reflect on how where they are in life is neither good nor bad. It is
Hmm.
simply living. Um, and
But
and
again, maybe that's a westernized thing about putting a moral judgment on a position.
well, or actually, I think more specifically, it's not just moral judgment, but it's also a final judgment. This idea of, you know, Ariel is going to have a great life from here on. That's the implication, you know. Whereas,
But that's a rom-com trope as well, isn't it? That's not
yeah,
something that's limited
no,
to
no, no, no,
Disney.
no. And they lived happily ever after, is the
Yeah.
phrase, isn't it? Whereas others, other children accessible films, so the young adult accessible films, uh, say, look, this might be how you're feeling now, but it's not going to be like this forever, you know. Um,
Yeah, I think this kind of does bleed into basically like the expectation that people have in romantic relationships there, because it builds upon the concept of the one, a soulmate,
yeah. Also,
which,
your wedding day.
oh yeah.
The idea that your wedding day
Oh
is the best day of your
yeah,
life.
because after that everything's going to be peachy keen. Um
No, after that, nothing's going to compare. That's the point. That's why so many, yeah, get so many bridezillas. You know, this is my day. You know, and then what do you think
but
that is going to happen? Where's
no, but it's because they think the story ends after that.
yeah,
But
exactly,
that
yeah.
but that again ties into
And
that
they lived
idea
happily
of
ever
this,
after.
yeah, and the soulmate and the fact that your life's going to be perfect. And I
Yeah,
and I think all of those concepts, and Disney is not responsible for those concepts, but they are um keeping those concepts alive
they,
in
yeah, yeah.
and and those concepts I do think are, I mean, if they're going to be those concepts, if they're going to be there and out in the world, because we're not going to be able to escape Disney, but I do think that we need to be able to consume things that have a counterbalance to that, that represent and that are more healthy. And I think Disney is trying to do that,
Yeah.
but you know,
I think they're trying, but I think they're also a victim of their brand,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah, well, you're right, because they have a what's the Disney thing, and it's like, it's like you don't have unhappy endings. Everything gets tied up and resolved at the end, doesn't it?
Mm.
And I think, yeah, it is a victim of what it puts, of what it wants to keep putting out into the world. And I think it often masks a lot, it kind of sweeps over very problematic things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, you don't have to tell a realistic story about a kidnapping,
No.
but can we at least acknowledge that kidnapping is going to be traumatic and take you more than a night and a culinary dance scene
And a library.
to at a library to make you feel a little bit, and also Belle's supposed to be the clever one because she reads. And I'm
Yeah.
like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and hence we come back to that simultaneous thing of Disney is inescapable. Disney uh, is necessarily, therefore, a foundational part of most of our lives. Um,
Yeah.
but also, I feel as though Disney, at the very least, as you say, they're trying to be more responsible. They're trying to sort of re-examine some of the stuff that they do, because they now acknowledge that they have, at least publicly they acknowledge that they have responsibilities. Therefore, but I suppose the reason why I'm fascinated by this conversation is that I just don't think most people see it. I think
Uh,
a little bit like with, and this is again, this is a whole other video that one day we may well do, but a little bit like with computer games. You know, when you have kids, you have parents who are actually our age and should know better because we've grown up with computer games. Parents going, "Oh my goodness, I didn't know that this game had, you know, sexual imagery and violence in it," and you're like, "Dude, games aren't for kids, or just for kids, you know, anymore." And even arguably they never were. It's that sort of Disney is in that category of, I think in a truer sense, much more reliably so. You can just put a kid in front of Disney, and probably nothing bad's going to happen. But it's also a dereliction of duty, I think, just to put your kid in front of Disney, or indeed put yourself in front of Disney, and not consume anything else, or not think about anything else, or not ask questions about what you're
yeah, well,
watching.
I think that's what I was saying about absolutely needing a counterbalance
Hmm.
to some of the things that they put out into the world
Hmm.
that are potentially, I mean, they're just oversimplified, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, yeah.
Well,
I was gonna say something about Shrek, you know, in the sense of like that's an interesting kind of made for like kids, but it's also it goes against some of the tropes
mm-hmm.
with, you know, Princess Fiona remaining an ogre at the end,
Yeah.
which was but also there was a lot, and this is something that other studios do way better than Disney. There were a lot of second level jokes.
Mm-hmm.
There were jokes that would have been, you know, there were jokes for an audience beyond the children,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
you know. So and actually I think that's a much cleverer way of making movies, in the sense of like, you know, you've got a surface level, you've got that you can watch as a child, there's like a level that you can see that there's something else going on. You know, you're making a movie that's just a bit more balanced and interesting, and a bit more like the real world, where there would be a variety of different, you know, things going on, you know, subtext.
Do you know, it's interesting actually that it's interesting actually that in that sense, yeah, Disney, the worlds of Disney movies often, and again less and less so with the more recent stuff, often present, particularly when it comes to royal houses and structures and their struggles, a world that's basically there to support and to provide resources for the protagonists. You know, the royalty
Mm.
benefits basically from it's a you know it's a classic feudal sort of structure more or less in terms of, well, feudalism and capitalism squished together. Shrek, I think, presents, funnily enough, a very much more capitalistic world whereby you got all of this stuff, especially in and around Farquaad's
Yeah,
castle and life, where
but I
people are
think
running their own
Shrek,
hustles. They've got their own little,
yeah,
you know, as you say, side interests. It's not all about the central characters, yeah, which is quite clever. Yeah, definitely.
but I think Shrek is a direct
Response, yeah.
response to the Disney trope.
Yes, yeah.
And yeah, I think it's, yeah, but yeah, I kind of just wish Disney was a little bit cleverer sometimes.
Well, and this is some.
Even the occasional metaphor in a song would be, you know, appreciated.
Well, and this is the thing is that, you know, it occurred to me when you were talking there about Shrek as a response to Disney. If you think about it, even with movie studios that have been around for 100 years, we've never seen, I would argue, such a such a singularly influential storytelling center in all
Mm.
of human history. I don't think we have. I don't think there's anything that
Mm.
compares to it. I mean, yes, there are great stories that we've inherited, like the Iliad, and you know, the stories that the brothers Grimm gathered together, Hans Christian Andersen, so on. So you know, we've got these stories, but there's never been one place, one author, one group of people pumping out essentially cultural mythology in such a
Yeah,
concentrated way ever before in the history of humanity.
no,
Um,
that's true.
and I find that I guess
Well,
that's
that was
basically what I was getting at before, in so much as that's what I find so interesting about its inescapable nature, and therefore the need to think about it.
well, I was thinking about that relates to what I was thinking about when we were halfway through the conversation in the sense of how we tell children stories nowadays,
Hmm.
because we don't necessarily read to children, and I say we in a global sense, we don't necessarily read to children in the same way we used to. We plonk them in front of the telly,
Hmm.
or and then the story unfolds. And so you are getting we're getting a unified childhood storytelling experience, aren't we?
Yeah.
With
Well,
a
and
dilution of culture that Disney's telling the stories.
well, and that's the thing, because Disney has a corporate perspective. It has things it will and will not say. If that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Characters it will and will not acknowledge. Parts of life that it will never talk about because
Yeah.
it's bad for the bottom line. I just find
But
that
I, I,
fascinating.
I find I think the other thing you have to recognize with Disney is it's marketed essentially on the sense that it's safe for kids, and so you can leave your child with Disney movies
Hmm.
and not supervise them because
Sorry,
because
sorry. Yeah, go on.
but that's what they're marketed at, isn't it? You
No,
can
yeah,
you
yeah,
can safely know that these are not going to hurt your child.
yeah. But
That
also
they
on
are,
the DVDs, for example, there's the so-called quick play button, isn't there? Where you push this button, and apparently it's just meant to get you straight to the film. But quick play also shows you all the adverts beforehand.
oh yeah.
It's so yeah, you can plonk them in front of it, press quick play, and they're gonna want the next Disney film or the next Disney. It's
Well,
it's
I think, to be honest, Mark, I think people are moving away from DVDs. This might
no
surprise
Blu-rays
you.
as well,
Yeah,
but
but people are not.
less
People are
so on Disney
not.
Plus. Though, yeah, you're right. Yeah, streaming, that's not a
Yeah,
problem. Yeah,
but then they've got the all of the things there.
people are moving away from DVDs. Says the woman with a wall of
I did
DVDs
listen.
behind her.
Listen, I I am personally not moving away from DVDs, but then I personally didn't move away from vinyl for many years
That's true.
either.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
So I am not talking about myself. I'm talking about a global trend.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely.
Honestly, I can't believe how critical you are of me. I was like, that's a genuine trend. People are not.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Thank you.
I just couldn't resist it, especially
No, of course
with the
not.
color coding as well. That wonderful color coding of covers.
Beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful,
It is
impractical.
beautiful. No,
Yeah.
me and Mrs. Soup found all of the Tarantino movies.
Well, I'm very happy for you. So,
Mhm.
is there anything else that you think we should mention then? Because
In
again,
terms of the Disney stuff.
well, yeah, just for this episode. In so much as do you feel as though I keep on no, so we keep on coming back to this idea that somehow we are potentially overly critical in our conversations. But I think I would probably say that we do criticize the things that we love. We choose to talk about things because we're interested in them. And
Yeah, I mean, I think the difficulty with this is I think Disney does need this criticism. I don't feel like I'm being overly critical
no,
in this sense.
no.
I think I'm very selective with how I come to Disney because I think there are so many problematic elements.
Well,
You know,
I mean, it's funny. It's funny because you talk about Beauty and the Beast as being like Stockholm syndrome. Because I was about to ask you, would you rather have not grown up with Disney?
no, I don't.
We can't answer that question, really, can we? Because we can't imagine it. So in that sense, are we all beholden to Disney in a way
Well,
that we can't control?
yeah. No, but I think that's true. And I don't think Disney is inherently bad.
No.
But I also don't think it's using its platform as a force for good. And I think
Hmm.
because it has such a huge platform, it should maybe take more of a responsibility than just how much money it can make.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
And I think Disney, because of the influence it has at obviously pivotal moments in people's lives, because your childhood is it affects adulthood
Yeah.
directly. I mean,
Well,
so
I
because
think things like your love expectations and
yeah,
prospects, and yeah.
and so I think it's one of those things where like Disney needs to be very aware of the influence and power that it has. It needs to know and make deliberate decisions that are not harmful
Hmm.
and are not perpetuating either stereotypes that are negative or ideal negative ideologies,
Mm-hmm.
and are give but and also provides aspirational characters that are not just, as you were saying, royal figures.
Yeah, be a princess. That said, though, and I think there's a valid counterpoint here that someone listening may well be thinking right now, and that is, well, isn't that exactly what Disney is trying to do by being so unconfrontational and so deliberately attempting to be essentially vanilla on every front? They're trying to be responsible with their platform, in so much as they don't want to. But I would say though that
I
that's not the same as being responsible. That's not getting sued and trying to please everyone.
Well, I mean, again, I for everything that Disney is, I always get the sense with Disney that its bottom line is money. Hence why it's just a churner outerer
Hmm.
of stuff.
Yeah,
Like if you think about when we were kids, there's like four Lion Kings, three
three
um
Aladdins, I think.
Aladdins, yeah,
Yeah,
and I think so for a while
there's the Mermaid
they
too, Little Mermaid too.
yeah, the Little
Yeah.
Mermaid, because she's the only Disney princess with a child.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh,
but
yeah.
this is the thing I'm saying. Like none of those sequels held any value, or they're not good movies. They were churned out on
Hmm.
a restricted budget just to capitalize on the love of the movie that they'd put in, and now they're just doing something similar with like making them all live action. And I think the problem is you're going to get, I'm the market is oversaturated with Marvel as far as I'm concerned, and it's oversaturated with Star Wars. And I feel like what they're doing with the villains and the live action is they're just giving us oversaturation,
Hmm.
and they're not really, when remaking these movies into live action, I don't think they're really correcting the course of where they, where a modern eye can see that it's a problematic. They're not really taking that opportunity to be like, well, this is problematic, maybe we should do something but modernize it. I mean, they're not doing any of that. They're just kind of like keeping things the same. And
If
I
if and this is where I think they are boxed into a corner. So, for example, with uh, a live action retelling of Cinderella, they could have, for example, gone to the original story where actually she wears a fur slipper instead of a glass slipper, for
and that the
example.
stepsisters chop their toes off to fit into the.
Exactly, yeah. So they could do that sort of stuff, but they never will, because they have essentially created what, in many people's minds, is the definitive, certainly the only story for the most part that many people
No, you're
know
right.
of that story. So if they are in a corner, they are, as I say, the single largest, most influential storytelling, certainly children's storytelling block that this world has ever known, and uh, and therefore that does, with that comes a great amount of power, but also hopefully an increasing amount of responsibility. The problem is, though, I'm not sure, because of that bottom line, that there's ever going to be anything other than this is what Disney does, and this is what Disney does not do, as opposed to
No, well,
trying to
I think
find
that
the
was.
next artistic thing, you know.
Well, no, I think that was definitely the point I was trying to make, in the sense that, like, I mean, Disney's producing a product. There's a market for that product,
That
but
they've
I also
created.
think,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
but I mean, like, some of the recent movies I've really loved. I mean, I really
Yeah.
loved Encanto
Yeah.
and stuff. So, but like, so I think there is space for that. But like, it is just, I think Disney, its bottom line is money, and whether or not that's true, that is certainly the what it feels like to me they're putting out into the world. A lot of the things as it comes down to like, how can we squeeze every little tiny thing out of this one thing that's popular?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so from my point of view, that kind of looking at the previous works and just literally trying to monetize everything is, I mean, it's a business model. It's what Disney does, but I find that puts me off.
Yeah, yeah, and but also as well, it's not what traditional storytellers did.
No,
they didn't just go, how can we retell this story for? Well, no,
but I mean, they do the same thing with the merchandising. With the, like, you can get Disney fabric, you can get Disney jigsaws, you can get Disney like dressing up costumes. You go to Disneyland and everything's expensive, and I think the plushies, everything Disney is there to consume.
Yeah. And
So
I suppose that's what I mean by how can we retell it, because obviously every story is retold for the next generation.
Yeah,
but it's that thing of it being an all consuming consumer focus is fascinating. Well, this has been an interesting one, hasn't it?
It has. I feel less like we've talked about the movies and more about like the Disney Corp.
Yeah, but I think that's because again, everyone knows the movies. That's the thing.
Yeah. But again, I mean, it's also, I mean, I don't think you can have a conversation about stuff at the minute around these areas without thinking about it like that. Because I mean, Disney's a monster, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and it affects us in ways that we're not even conscious of.
I know it affects me.
Yeah,
I refuse to buy Disney Plus. I just come around and watch movies with you if I need to.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. So, hopefully this has been interesting to listen to, at least at home.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we have any conclusions, but we've definitely, I think, hopefully given you and I think each other some food for thought. And, you can love what you want to love. I mean, like, for example, I saw someone doing a review of the Bella and Edward stories, I've forgotten what they're called now.
Or Twilight.
Twilight, yeah, New Moon and etc. Say, look, watch them, love them, adore them if you want to, but go in knowing just a little bit more about the context of what makes a good relationship,
Yeah.
So it's okay to love what you love. I guess we're just hoping that you also have a head on your shoulders as well. So what's the topic of our next episode then?
John Wick.
Yeah. I once saw him kill two men at a bar with a pencil. Yep, John Wick. We just watched John Wick 4, did we not?
We did, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about there. It's going to be an interesting one as well. And crucially, a hero who loves dogs. So yeah, that'll be welcome.
Although upsetting about how many dogs get killed in those movies, but anyway.
Yeah.
The multiverse calls Bodina back into its swirling depths. The warm conversation and cosmic mystery must depart for now. We will materialize again, somewhere new, in time and space. But for now, it's goodbye from the Else Realm Diner!
Else Realm Diner.
More than anything else in her life, she wants to see Paris.